Hey everyone, it's OSK, and today I have for you the complete Spellbreak class guide for Chapter 2. Spellbreak is a great game with a lot of great mechanics, and mastering all the different classes is step 1 to improving your Spellbreak gameplay and dominating the competition. I've done my best to make this great for beginners entering the game for the first time, and also returning veterans who need a refresher. I have also made sure to give you guys some great builds for the new game mode Dominion so you can dive right in after watching this video. I have even listed the classes in order of difficulty and skill expressions, so we'll be getting more and more advanced as the guide goes on. Stick around if you want to get into the classes with the most skill. Another quick disclaimer, this video was made before the release of Chapter 2, so some gameplay clips will be from before some of the changes were made, but all of the information itself is up to date, so don't worry too much. And now, before we get started, please consider leaving a like on the video once we're done, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more Spellbreak guides just like this one for Chapter 2. And with that out of the way, let's get into this. The first class in Spellbreak we'll talk about is the Stoneshaper class. The Stoneshaper is a mid to close range brawler who loves to keep fights up close and personal to dish out as much damage as possible. Masters of the Stoneshaper class will control the pace and location of the fight and always have surprise movement in their back pocket to throw off their opponents. The Stoneshaper class is a versatile exiling machine with strengths such as big burst combos with their boulders and shockwaves, good movement mix-ups, ease of use of the class, and the surprisingly long range of their shockwaves. The class provides quite a few tools to deal with opponents quickly before they can pose a challenge, and great Stoneshapers will know how to use their class skills effectively to be quick on their feet and deadly with their strikes. Let's get into the class skills for the Stoneshaper class. The first skill unlocked by Stoneshapers is Stone Skin, which allows the user to regenerate 3 armor with every slam of the Stone Gauntlet. It also provides 20 extra max armor as an added bonus. Strategic use of this skill will make it so you don't need to use as many armor shards in the game, and will make close fights a little easier. The second skill of the Stoneshaper class is Bedrock, and it allows players to descend much more quickly to the ground than normal when activating Stone's primary spell. It is the source of all advanced movement the class has to offer. This sudden burst of movement can combo with certain runes to allow for massive movement mix-ups to either gain ground or mix up your opponent, making this skill very useful indeed. The third skill of the Stoneshaper class is Accretion. This skill allows your Boulderfall sorcery to grow in size as they fly through the air, increasing their area of effect as they go. This can be very useful for surprise attacks and combos as well, and pairs very nicely with Stoneshaper's fourth skill. Avalanche increases your max Boulderfall charges by 1. This allows you to throw 2 boulders one after another, which opens the door to even more damage. For builds, you're typically going to want to double down on the close range strengths of your class and try to rush down your opponents. Wind is great for finishing off the last bit of health with reliable, easy to hit damage. The Tornado can also suck in your opponents and reposition your boulders, which is nice. Fire is great if you like having a reliable burst option for mid to close range aerial opponents that your Stone Gauntlet can't reach. It also has great elemental interactions with Stone. For talents, I recommend choosing Intelligent, Vigor, and Inspired, or Intelligent, Wellspring, and Gilded. The first of these builds is great for early tankiness and extra damage, and the second is great for scaling quickly in Dominion especially. For runes, I recommend taking the Dash rune or the Flight rune. Dash is great for short burst movement, while Flight is great for traveling across large areas in a short time. Flight can also be used to get higher ground and rain down your boulders from above. Use all these tools for the Stoneshaper class to smack down your opponents and pave the way to victory. The second class in Spellbreak we'll go over is the Pyromancer class. The Pyromancer is a versatile mid to close range control mage who loves to keep continuous damage on their opponents and dictate the pace of the fight. Good Pyromancers will never let their opponents flee too far once they land the first shot, and will finish the fight with a flurry of well-placed fireballs. The Pyromancer class possesses a number of strengths in their toolkit. It has great offensive and defensive control tools like Ignite and a Fireball, good damage with the Fireball spell itself, and access to plenty of diverse viable builds, not to mention its ease of use. The Pyromancer is a jack of all trades with no one single trait outweighing another. A good Pyromancer will master all aspects of their play and will use the class skills to control the situation and fire back with a vengeance. Let's get into the class skills for the Pyromancer class. The first skill unlocked by a Pyromancer is Combust, and this gives your fireballs a wider explosion radius for easier damage, as well as providing Ignite, which will stick to your opponent as damage over time. This is great to use as a tracking tool as well when the enemy tries to run and hide, as they will glow red when they take damage from you even behind walls. The second skill is Firefly, and this lets the user fly both into and out of danger by running through their own firewalls as well as teammates. The flight ability doesn't last very long, but it can be paired with a dash rune to fly faster and extend the distance traveled. The third skill of the Pyromancer class is Pyrolysis. This doubles the damage of your firewall on the initial activation and makes it glow blue as well for you Azula fans out there. Pyromancer's fourth and final skill is called Conflagration, and this makes the explosion of your fireballs spawn extra smaller fireballs that apply ignite onto any opponent they touch. It's not the most useful skill in the world, but it can be good in tight spaces, so be sure to take advantage of that. Moving on to builds, you typically want to choose something that either reinforces your abilities at close range or lets you cover your weaknesses at long range. The first gauntlet I like to take is the Toxic Gauntlet for close range and extra AoE. Fire and Toxic together allow you to create big AoEs of good damage called Dragonfire, which allows for easy follow-up and can be cast from quite a distance away. The second gauntlet I like to use with Pyromancer is Frost. Fire and Frost cancel each other out when combined, but when used separately can give you quite a number of options in a fight. Frost is a great way to open up the fight from a distance, and you can then re-engage with a fire to finish out the exile when up close. Frost also can provide some decent CC. For talents, I recommend taking Intelligent, Vigor, and Inspired, or Intelligent, Wellspring, and Gilded. The first build offers some extra tankiness with increased damage, while the second build lets you scale very well in your Dominion games. For runes, I recommend taking Dash and Spring Step. Both runes are great for short movements that will let you kite around the battlefield and rush down your opponents. Using the tools of the Pyromancer class effectively will let you channel your inner fire and reduce the competition to ashes. The third class I'll cover is the Conduit class. The Conduit class is based on long-range control with some utility tools. Conduits love to keep their opponents at bay from long range with rapid-fire, fast-moving projectiles and control the open parts of the map with no cover. They also have access to a powerful stun with their Lightning Strike sorcery. Great Conduits will keep up the pressure once an advantage is sealed and will use their superior damage and mobility tools to finish out fights in a dominant, oppressive fashion. The Conduit class possesses quite a few strengths to help achieve these goals. Those with a first-person shooter background will love the familiarity of Conduit's mechanics and spell actions. The Lightning Bolt behaves very closely to hit scan, requiring just a bit, if any, lead to your shots to hit your opponent. Due to this, Conduit is also very reliable for tagging enemies with damage of any kind, and it also has access to increasing that damage, so a lot of reward for relatively low cost. A good Conduit will use their superior spacing abilities and class skills to always keep their distance and rain down lightning bolts from above. Let's get into the class skills of the Conduit class. The first skill unlocked by a Conduit is Potential Energy, and this gives your lightning bolts extra damage for each successive lightning bolt you shoot, up to a maximum of 5 bonus damage per bolt. Very useful for racking up the damage in a hurry. The second skill is called Overload, and this is one of Conduit's more versatile tools. By activating a Lightning Strike sorcery, an extra rune charge will be applied to the user, allowing for more movement options than normal, and making fights drastically easier for the user as a result. The third skill of the Conduit class is Power Surge. By throwing down a Lightning Strike, your mana bar will not deplete from spells for 4 entire seconds, allowing you to spam spells with no costs. Finally, the fourth skill for Conduits is called Secondary Strikes, and this adds 4 additional strikes for your Lightning Strike sorcery, making the AoE stay in place for longer and deal more damage if the opponent gets struck multiple times. Very good for holding down an area and zoning enemies off of a capture point. Moving on to builds, for offhand gauntlets you typically want to choose something that covers you for close range. The first gauntlet I recommend is Toxic, which allows for close range damage and great elemental interactions that will stun the opponent. The second gauntlet I recommend is Fire. The Fire gauntlet is great for close range damage and more damage oriented area denial as opposed to CC. Fire is a great tool to zone opponents away from certain areas, so I recommend using it in Dominion. For talent builds, I recommend using Spellslinger, Dexterity, and Inspired, or Spellslinger, Tough, and Gilded. The first build will allow for a lot of mobility along with extra damage, and the second is great for scaling early on, in Dominion especially. For runes, there are a lot of options on this particular class due to the Overload skill, but I recommend taking the Dash rune and the Teleport rune primarily. Dash is great for short burst movements, while Teleport is great for covering massive distance in an instant. By using the Spellslinger talent from either of the previous builds, you can get a lot more out of these runes than other classes. There are a lot of ways to play, and all these tools in the Conduit class will help you dominate the HoloLands with unlimited power. Next is the Toxicologist class. The Toxicologist is a straight-up close-range burst assassin who loves to get up close and personal and strike down opponents from stealth. Good Toxicologists will never let their opponents react to their attacks as they strike from the shadows with their high mobility and increased damage from invisibility. Their natural burst damage comes from the Toxic Gauntlet, with the Toxic Spray spell behaving much like a shotgun, dealing big damage up close and not so much damage from range. Toxic Sorcery also allows the user to toss toxic clouds across the battlefield, which the Toxicologist class can use for some mysterious maneuvers. As mentioned, one of the Toxicologist class's biggest strengths is their high mobility and access to the best burst damage in the game. The class also possesses an inherently high skill ceiling, allowing for tons of outplays and lots of options in any situation. The amount of mobility from skills in the class, and burst damage of course, should give you enough leeway to always come out on top in your matches. Let's get into the class skills of the Toxicologist class. The level 1 skill for the Toxicologist class is Viscosity, and this allows your toxic sprays to leave a sticky puddle behind, which can slow your opponents as they walk over them and tick for extra damage. Puddles will spawn below any opponent hit by Toxic as well, making it great for trapping and damaging your enemies further. The second skill is called Vanishing Mists, and this is where the fun of toxicology starts to become apparent. This skill allows you to enter through your toxic clouds and dash into invisibility for a time. You can also re-enter the cloud as long as it's up, so have fun with that. The third skill is where the Toxicologist class gets disgusting. Outbreak allows the user to deal increased damage with their toxic spray from invisibility. This also works with runes like Shadow Step and Invisibility, making for a lot of situations to delete your opponents on the spot with big combos of stealth and toxic slaps. The final skill in a Toxicologist kit is Spreading Sickness, which just allows the user to throw 2 extra toxic clouds with their sorcery. This is useful for allowing more ways for a Toxicologist to activate Vanishing Mists, especially if the toxic clouds land in different areas. You can absolutely style on your opponents with the Toxicologist class with the correct build. Speaking of builds, there are a few options you can choose that work well with the Toxicologist class. For offhands, the Fire Gauntlet is great for extra close range damage and AoE, and another option you can take is the Frost Gauntlet. Frost is great for covering long range damage and also close range CC, which lets you outplay your opponents even more. For talent builds, I recommend taking Runic Fluency and Inspired, or Intelligent, Wellspring, and Gilded. The first build is Toxicologist's Bread and Butter, allowing for extra movement and damage in general, and the second build is great if you want to scale harder in Dominion especially, and the extra damage you get from the build pairs very nicely with the Outbreak skill as well. For runes, I recommend taking either the Dash rune or the Shadow Step rune. Dash is great for quick burst movements, while Shadow Step lets you move and turn invisible at the same time, which is very useful for staying on your enemy with extra Outbreak empowered toxic sprays. Shadow Step especially goes well with the first talent build with Runic Fluency and opens the class up to a lot of extra damage. Altogether, the Toxicologist class has a great set of tools with a high skill ceiling to allow the player to style on and outplay their opponents before they even have the chance to fight back. Fifth, we have the Frostborn class. The Frostborn is a long-range sniper with extra utility who loves to tag enemies from afar with ice lances, but can handle itself up close if it needs to with a well-placed flash freeze sorcery. A good Frostborn will always find a way to keep their distance and land snipe after snipe until they come out on top. Some things that Frostborns do well are landing big bursts of damage at long range, providing increased movement speed in the form of a class skill, and providing defense in close range engagements along with some CC. The Frostborn class does possess a high skill ceiling between landing your snipes and using your class skills well, and does provide the player with plenty of ways to counteract your opponent. Let's get into the class skills of the Frostborn class. The first skill at level 1 for the Frostborn class is Frozen Alacrity, and this gives your Frost Gauntlet the added benefit of making ice trails you can skate on for faster movement. A new addition for Chapter 2 is that the class skill now makes you immune to being slowed or frozen, so you can skate on your own ice trails more safely than before. The second skill a Frostborn has is called Icicle, and this skill is like a 2-in-1. Icicle highlights visible enemies with a red color while you charge it, and even eliminates the mana needed for your snipes when fully charged. Very useful for successive ice lances. Tundra is the third skill of the Frostborn class, and this tool is mainly used in close range when you need to get out of a sticky situation. Tundra provides immunity to all damage and CC when you initially activate your Flash Freeze sorcery, so not only do you potentially freeze your opponent, but you also get to live through their combos as well. The fourth and final skill the Frostborn class gets is Ice Prism, and this just adds 35% extra damage to an overcharged Ice Lance snipe. Not too much else to go over, just hold your primary spell a little longer for some extra damage. Now for builds, for offhand gauntlets, I recommend covering for close range damage as much as possible. Toxic and Stone are both great options for this. Toxic is great for burst damage and AoE CC options, while Stone is great for pure damage. With Stone, you can also break apart your own ice trails to try and slow your opponents down. For talents, I recommend taking Curious, Fellowship, and Thirsty, or Intelligent, Dexterity, and Gilded. The first build is primarily for support and healing your teammates with extra potions, while the second build is great for scaling more quickly in Dominion. For runes, I recommend taking the Dash rune and the Teleport rune. Dash is great for quick burst movements, and Teleport is great for covering massive distances in an instant. It's especially useful for getting out of difficult situations in a hurry. And while many find the cold uncomfortable, those who embrace the power of the Frostborn class and hone their skills will find themselves on the winning side of most engagements. The sixth and final class in Spellbreak is the Tempest class. The Tempest is a highly mobile brawler type class with the highest skill ceiling in the game, who loves to dance around their opponents with a whirlwind of extra movement and in the fight with a flurry of highly damaging spells. The best Tempests will not let a single spell hit them, as they let the winds take them to victory. Once the fighting starts, good Tempests will always be looking for different ways to keep themselves off the ground, moving with increased speed and agility until the deed is done. Their signature Wind Gauntlet provides a low damaging but rapid fire and easy to use Wind Shear spell that consumes very little mana, along with a tornado to suck their opponents into an onslaught of damage. The main strengths of a Tempest consist of their high mobility, extra available damage, and low sorcery cooldowns, all thanks to class skills. The success of the Tempest class is all dependent on the experience and skill of the wielder. The playstyle itself is wildly different from anything else in Spellbreak, so it requires a lot of time to execute correctly. The more time you put into mastering the class's skills and abilities, the more success you'll find. Let's get into the class skills of the Tempest class. The first skill of the Tempest class is called Wind Surge, which allows the user to shoot wind shears at surfaces and impulse off of them in the opposite direction. This unlocks advanced movement from the very beginning. This can apply to the ground, walls, terrain, pretty much anything on the map you can shoot your wind spell at. Tempest's second skill is called Updraft, which lets the user launch themselves up into the air by entering their own tornado. This is very useful for gaining the height advantage in a fight very easily and quickly, and it pairs nicely with a lot of the movement from the Wind Surge skill as well. Keeping yourself in the air paves the way for the Tempest's third class skill, Squall. Squall lets you have extra spell damage and decreases your damage taken by staying in the air after using Wind Surge or Updraft. It's that easy. The class's final skill is called Sudden Gust, which speeds up the cooldowns of your sorceries by staying in the air after a short time. This can be very useful for recharging your tornadoes to always stay in the air if you want. Using these skills in unique and effective ways is key to your success as a Tempest, and practice will only help you develop your skills to master the class. For builds, there are two main offhands you want to use in Fire and Frost. Fire is the more common gauntlet for close range damage and AoE area denial, but Frost is great if you're really good at hitting your snipes at long range. It's very flashy but also very difficult, so definitely put in the practice for this build in particular. For talents, I recommend taking Runic Fluency, Dexterity, and Mystical, or yet again Intelligent, Wellspring, and Gilded. The first build is great for maintaining high amounts of mobility for an absurd amount of time, and the second build is great for scaling early on in Dominion. For runes, I recommend either the Dash rune or the Spring Step rune. Both runes offer quick burst movements that any good Tempest would love in their kit. The momentum you can salvage from both runes definitely helps smooth out the gameplay experience from the Tempest class, and is the mastery of all this advanced movement and mechanical prowess that make the Tempest one of the highest skill classes in Spellbreak. And that is the end of the complete Spellbreak class guide for Chapter 2 for newcomers and returning vets in 2021. Thank you guys so much for watching all the way to the end. Keep in mind that this video was made and written before Chapter 2 was officially released, so some of the gameplay you see may be slightly different from the current patch. I hope you guys all learned something today, and I want you to answer something for me. What class do you like the most? And if you're new to Spellbreak, what class do you really want to grind to get good at? Let me know down in the comments. I'll be making a ton of guides for Spellbreak Chapter 2, so be sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video if you enjoyed. Also, be sure to follow the socials down below, and now that's going to do it for me. I've been OSK, y'all have a great day, and I will see you all out there.